Hi everyone, welcome to my presentation. With great Power Apps comes great reusability. Thank you to the Scottish Summit team for the opportunity to speak today, and thank you for your time. Please use hashtag Scottish Summit 2023 on social media when referring to this event. And a big thank you to KNK for sponsoring the Scottish Summit this year. I'm Keith Atherton. I've been a software developer and architect for over 20 years. My details are on screen now. Feel free to connect with me. So what we'll look at today are the benefits of reuse, some user interface and code reuse options, and some upcoming features. So my origin story, the way I got started with Power Apps, is that I was paired up with a citizen developer who'd created an internal app, and the app looked great. However, one of the screens looked a bit like this. Now the screen itself worked great, it's clearly a busy screen, and it had 50 buttons on the screen that were intended to look very similar to each other. However, I'd found out that this citizen developer had created all of these buttons individually one by one. And you can imagine what that process was like, particularly when they had to go back and change fonts, colors, and any other properties. They all had to be changed. So when I was brought on board, it was to bring a programmer's mindset to see, can I make things more efficient and reusable? And we'll cover the solution that we used a bit later on. So first up, the benefits of reuse. We've got the concept in software development and other industries of don't repeat yourself or dry. We can lead to a faster development as well if we've created something once and use it again and again. We're not actually duplicating any effort. If we're reusing things, we're going to have a consistent user interface and consistent code behavior. There's also reliability of using components which have been fully tested. So again, if we create a new screen or a new app and we use something that has been created and tested before, we can be confident it behaves as expected. And there's also something to be said for building a library of reusable components for everyone else to use. So as this library gets built up over time, it's almost like a toolbox we can reach in and say, great, we've got that customized date picker, we've got that reusable menu control, and we can just drag and drop and use it very quickly and very easily in apps and screens going forward. So first up, we'll look at some user interface reuse options. And first up is what we actually used in that case there with the 50 buttons on the same screen. Now the gallery control is a control that contains other controls and it shows a set of data. This control can show multiple records from a data source. So in the case there on the left of accounts and in the middle of browse, these look like they're actually pointing to collections showing business data and actually repeating that same layout for every record there. That way we're not actually hard coding each value, and whether there's 1, 10 or 200 values in that collection, they'll get repeated in this gallery control. And you can mimic them to make them look like lists or even grids if you need to as well. So you can nest galleries within other galleries if you need to take it to that level. And when you start with these, you can either start from blank, or you can use one of the predefined templates as a starting point. And we can see some of those on the right hand side, things like title, image and title, and so on. Now, while these controls are really good for business data, they could also be useful for things like menu controls or ribbon controls. Essentially anything where you need some repetition, but you need the same look and feel throughout. Next up, we'll look at Canvas components and component libraries. So in the top right hand corner, we can see a menu control, and this actually is using a gallery, which we just saw, and it's got button options for home, admin, about, and help. Now, because we want all of these to have the same look and feel, a gallery was used. And if we had an app, let's say it had 10 screens, and we wanted this menu on each of the screens, we could actually copy and paste that gallery across all of the screens, and that should work fine. However, if we need to make a change to that menu, let's say add another option within there or change the cosmetics of it, if we have copied and pasted instance across other screens, we actually need to go in there and actually change them all individually manually. However, if you create something as a component, which we can see on the left there within the tree view, this is a centralized component. So when you make instances of that component throughout an app, multiple on one screen, multiple across many screens, whenever you change that centralized component, all those changes to the component get reflected to all instances throughout the app. So it means you make the change once, gets reflected everywhere. And taking the idea of components further is if you need components that were going to be reused across multiple apps, then you could actually create a component library. So this component library could contain multiple components, let's say again, maybe a menu control or some customized date picker or other input control. If you needed this reflected on multiple apps, you could have those apps refer to the component library with the components you need. And that way, if you change the components within the library, you've got the option to update those references in the apps to reflect the changes throughout. So that's really the recommended way to go to reuse components across multiple apps. There's also ways of grouping elements together. So on the tree view there, we can see there's group 1, and this actually contains 3 controls. Now, you can actually group and ungroup elements by using Ctrl G or the context menu, and it can be very, very useful because you can select the group itself and modify some common properties of controls within the group. So things like visible, positions, sizes, typical things that are common throughout. However, one thing to be aware of is that groups do not have their own properties. This is just to help organize things within the tree view, and they don't affect the layout of an app. A more preferable option, quite commonly, is by using a container. Now, a container, similarly, can hold a set of controls, but a container is a control in its own right, and it does have its own properties. So if you was to toggle things like visibility, the container itself does show and hide. Now, containers do affect the app layout, but they're also usable from an accessibility point of view because they help screen reader users understand the structure of the app. So the example we have on screen now is a left container that says Manage Contacts with buttons A and B, and on the right we have the right container that says Manage Appointments with buttons C and D. And again, by using containers, the screen reader would know to go top down, left to right, and really describe well the layout of that app. There are also going to be benefits for keyboard users who use tabbing to navigate through these controls. There's also the concept of duplication of elements as well, and this is possible with screens and components. You can see it there within the context menu. Now, many elements can also be copied and pasted. It's a bit of an old school approach and can be useful when you need it, but again, bear in mind that when you copy and paste and create instances, if you was to change one of the instances, it does not get reflected to all of them. You can also duplicate apps by using the Save As feature as well. So there's also a way to create responsive layouts, and the concept of responsive web design is quite popular within web development. And this is where you can create web pages that look good on all devices. Now, responsive web design will automatically adjust for different screen sizes and form factors. So we can see in the example there, this illustration shows a website that does have a good layout for a browser on a PC, a browser on a laptop, which is very, very similar, but just smaller size. But you can see with the tablet and the mobile device that the layouts have actually changed. These responsive layouts, they've responded to fill the form factor and screen size in the most effective way that the app developer saw fit. Now, this is also possible with Power Apps. You can create responsive layouts, and there are some predefined ones available, and we can see here at the bottom of the screen things like split screen, sidebar, and header, main section, footer. So these are some common layouts that you would see on websites and can be used here, and typically they're done by using containers as the building blocks of this responsive design. Also, you can make layout dynamic. So if you create a responsive layout, these controls can respond to different devices or window sizes, making various experiences feel more natural. So to achieve this responsive layout, you can adjust some of the settings and write expressions throughout your app. You can use formulas and create this dynamic layout. So the example on screen now, on the left hand side, we have a portrait orientation for an app with an upper container and a lower container. However, if you use formulas and you change this on a mobile device, let's say to a landscape orientation, you can then move the upper container to the left and the lower container to the right, so it still fills the screen. It doesn't just shrink the screen and mean that you need to pan and pinch and zoom and see everything. It means it nicely lays out to that different form factor if you need to. Now, one way of usefully checking these different layouts is the new device preview feature, which is within the Power App Studio. We can see there that there are several devices with their widths and heights provided, such as Samsung Galaxy phones, Motorola Moto phones, and so on. But you can also set a custom width and height to, again, test that within Power App Studio to say, does this layout work as expected? There's also the idea of reusing customized controls. So if you wanted a custom theme for your app that defined a unique look and feel for that app or for an organization, you can get the out-of-the-box controls, which are really good, but then make changes to the colors, sizes, and other properties as well. Now, if you used to create an app with multiple screens and actually go ahead and add, let's say, a combo box, and every time on that screen you needed to change the colors, sizes, font size, and so on, it'd be quite cumbersome. So there's a really good approach to this that Matthew Devaney has a blog post about, and this is about creating the customized controls and saving them to a hidden template screen. And then when you actually create user visible screens, you can make copies of these template controls and paste them onto the user facing screens, so you don't have to go through all that customization all over again. Another approach to take this further is by having those user facing screen controls refer to the properties of these template controls. That way, if you ever change the template controls, again, sizes, colors, and other properties, those changes get immediately reflected on the user-facing screens. Now, if you do want to look into creating custom themes, Sancho Harker has created a really good free branding template app to help build these custom themes easily based on the colors that you need. Okay, so we covered some user interface reuse options. Let's look at some code reuse options. Now, the first one we'll look at is the idea of constants, which is very popular in many programming languages. In this case, the constants are actually global variables that are acting as constants that we'll refer to throughout an app. So you can place these constants in the app on start at the very load of the app, and then you can refer to them throughout an app. And this is really to keep a single source of truth instead of replicating instances of code or values throughout an app. So on the top example there, we can see some code that has some hard-coded numbers. Things like health, that starts with 100, and then we can see some values where it's -20 and +10s. Now this is okay, but again, if you used to have this similar code in multiple places within an app, and you wanted to change those +10s to +20s, you potentially need to hunt down throughout the app all those instances and make all of the changes manually. However, with the bottom example, if you have the concept of constants, let's call that a health bonus, which is a +10 at the moment, and in future you want to change that to a +20. It means that if your code just referred to GBL health bonus, the variable itself, if you was to change the constant value in that single place, that change gets reflected anywhere in the code where that variable is referred to. So much more efficient. Simple but effective. Another recent addition is the idea of named formulas, and these can be set in the formulas property of the app. So we can see in the code snippet there some formulas such as user email, user info, and so on. Now this is really that you've got these values here, so you don't need to perform the same calculation, or it could be a hard-coded value, throughout the app. Again, the idea of this single source of truth. So in this case, the user email calls the user function and gets the email property from it. And again, instead of having that snippet of code replicated throughout the app, you can just call user email and it will perform the calculation when you refer to it. So the idea of named formulas is that you simplify the app's initialization, you can reduce the app load time as well because these are not calculated when the app starts, these are just there as reference. You can reuse logic, again, instead of having it repeated throughout, and you can improve the maintainability of the app as well by storing it in a single place. So the great thing with the formula values is that they're always available, they're always going to be up to date, you don't need to keep polling and updating the value manually. The definition of these formulas are immutable, so they cannot be changed throughout the app. Once that user email is set here in the named formulas, that definition cannot be changed anywhere else, so you've got confidence that you're getting that exact value that you need. And again, as mentioned, the calculation is deferred. So it's only throughout the app as a refer to user email does that formula actually then get calculated and return me the value. And if I never call it, then the calculation never gets performed. Another recent addition, which adds a lot more power to the PowerFX language, is user-defined functions. Now this is a great way to organize and reuse formulas because you can encapsulate your logic into functions. And large formulas can be split into smaller parts, which is easy to understand, test, and reuse across an app. Now functions can be recursive, as in the example with total reports in the code snippet right there, and they can be imperative and have side effects as well. So it really does add a lot more power to the programming language within Power Apps. Another useful thing in terms of reuse is the environment variables. Now this is where you can store values specific to that environment. So if you needed a variable where the value is different, let's say in a test environment to a production environment, you can set it actually in the Power Platform portal level here instead of hard-coded within an app. The great thing as well is it's not just Canvas apps, you can use these within flows as well. Now if we take a look at the example on the left, we're actually going to create a new environment variable. This one's called report URL, and it actually holds a Power BI report URL as a piece of text. And the value at the very bottom there, the current value, is actually the value that we're using for that environment. So this is useful. Let's say if this is a Power BI report URL and we have an app that is in development, test and production, but in each case we have a different Power BI report and hence a different URL for each environment. Instead of opening the app in each environment and change a hard-coded URL on a Power BI tile, we can instead refer to this environment variable. That's really useful to keep this separation, but also in future, if this environment variable changes, we can easily change it in the portal. We don't have to open the app and change a hard-coded value. So the way we refer to these values within an app is you add these two data sources there, the environment variable definitions and environment variable values. In the code snippet on the right, we can see we're actually looking up this environment variable's value and storing it in a variable called GBL report URL. And from there I can use it anywhere I need. In this case, it's actually within a Power BI tile. Another useful thing in terms of reuse is the Power Apps Component Framework, or PCF. Now this allows you to create code components for model-driven as well as Canvas apps. And this is more of a pro developer way of building reusable controls, and you can use HTML, TypeScript and CSS. Now what we can see on screen is actually the PCF gallery. And this is a collection of PCF components created by many people in the community that have been shared publicly for the benefit of everyone. So we can see things like postcode validation and many other things available too. Okay, let's look at some upcoming features and where to find out about them. So first up, we mentioned about the responsive web design, and we're going to get some improvements here with the drag and drop to build responsive pages more easily. So we can see the example there, the use of the containers, these different layouts on the left, of being able to put these together a lot more quickly, a lot more easily. One way to keep up to date with these changes as well is the Dynamics 365 and Microsoft Power Platform Release Planner. Now this is great, you can filter if you just care about the Power Platform. You can see all release plans or even build up your own My Release Plan as well, just to keep up to date with features you care about. And you can see things that are planned, coming soon, and features that you can try now. And it does tell you the scheduled dates as well for things that are going to go into public preview, GA, and other statuses as well. And also another way to keep up to date is the Microsoft Power Platform blog. So it's a great way of keeping up to date with new features, things that are upcoming, and also use cases for these features as well. So really good source of information. And another useful thing is that each part of the Power Platform, Power Apps, Power Automate, and so on, they have their own product specific blogs as well, if that's something you want to keep a track of. So we covered the benefits of reuse, different user interface and code reuse options, and some upcoming features and where to find out about them. So we've reached the end. I want to have a big thank you again to K&K for sponsoring the Scottish Summit this year. And if you have any questions, I'm always happy to help. Feel free to reach out to me on Twitter or LinkedIn. And apart from that, thank you very much for your time. Bye for now.